Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for Women's Writers Fest by She the People TV. Taking on the conversation forward from where we have left, stories are not always tales that remove you from your inconvenient reality and transport you to a world where there's a happy ending. Stories are not always fiction that set us in a world or a period from which we can detach ourselves and view them more objectively. Sometimes stories are our everyday gruesome reality, which needs to be chronicled, which needs to be told because truth deserves a place in our social narratives. And it is our duty to stare it in the eye, no matter if it leaves us feeling restless. One such story being told is through a book called The Good Girls An Ordinary Killing, written by author Sonia Faleiro, known for books like The Girl and Beautiful Thing. Welcome to Women's Writers Fest, Sonia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, for those who don't know, The Good Girls An Ordinary Killing is based on the death of two teenage girls from Badaun district in 2014, if I'm correct. Since I had the privilege of having a peek into Sonia's book, I can tell you this, and I mean this in the best way possible, that it's not an easy read, but I think it is one of the most significant women-centric books of 2021. So let's start with the conversation. Sonia, The Good Girl stirs a very timely conversation about gender, honor, and violence. Why is it that honor largely trumps women's agency in our society, according to you?
I think it's because we um, continue to stand in the way of women's progress and development because it isn't in our best interest, and by our I mean in the best interest of men, as many men continue to see it, to allow women equal rights, human rights, opportunities, employment, independence. And a lot of the cases that we are looking at where women have been attacked, it's because of the fact that they have expressed some agency. And I actually think that, we, while we believe that these attacks, and which often start as small acts of harassment, are the result of powerlessness, they are actually because women are starting to assert themselves and are starting to utilize their power. And I think it says a lot about where we are as a nation, culturally, economically. We are certainly in flux, and this is why we are seeing more of these attacks. But unless we address them holistically, looking at how we talk to girls and how we treat women in our family, how we educate boys and girls in school, the employment opportunities that we offer, and the social and developmental programs that we have, I don't see how we can actually make any constructive changes moving forward.
That's interesting. There are plethora of cases in India, sadly, about how, for people in our society, honor is a bigger priority than women's life and their agency. So, what compelled you to write on this particular story, or this particular case from a small village in Western UP? And why have you deemed it an ordinary killing?
So we all know, we all remember, and I feel that we all constantly think about the events of the night of December 2012, when a young woman was raped and tortured in a moving bus in Delhi and then thrown out along with her friend. And that was uh, it's such an unforgettable event in all our lives, because I think for a lot of women who grew up in India, or who live in India, we felt that that could have been us. Um, One of the things that happened, as you know, Yamini, as a result of the case, was that people started talking more about sexual assault. And that was really a breakthrough moment culturally for India. And the other thing that happened as a result of people's interest was that the media started covering cases of sexual assault. So much so that you couldn't open the morning paper without seeing, the story of the latest rape splashed on the papers. And I think, like everybody else, I was looking at these. I was looking at uh, these consistent string of assaults and thinking, what is going on? Who are these people committing all these rapes in every corner of the country, victimizing everyone from babies to elderly women? And why can't they be caught? Why are we not seeing anything stop, anything change? So the idea that I originally had, which stemmed from my fear and my confusion and my own questions, was simply what is going on in India, and just trying to wrap my head around this epidemic of violence. And when the case in Badaun happened, as your viewers may recall, two children, two teenagers, aged 16 and 14, were found hanging in a mango tree in an orchard in their village of Katra Sadatganj. And immediately people said, well, it's rape, it's murder. And I thought, I mean, how again? And I thought it would make sense to make the Badaun case the centerpiece of a study on sexual violence in India. And I was already living in London at the time, and I went down to Badaun for a week, expecting to do some reporting and then head back to London and continue with the rest of the book. The idea really was that the Badaun case would be one part of this larger book about sexual violence. But what happened when I went to Badaun, when I went to Katra Sadatganj, is that I felt there was something happening here that hadn't been captured in media reports. There were conflicting stories. There was silence. There was fear. There were some very obvious falsehoods that were being repeated. There was a whole bunch of people who were present on the event that the children, who in the book I call Padma and Lali, a whole bunch of people who were present when they disappeared, who were all telling a different story. It was a really eerie and just an unexpected response, and I realized at the end of that week that I didn't know what had happened, and I couldn't include this story in my book because I had no resolution, and no matter what had been published, nobody else agreed on the resolution either. And out of this confusion and curiosity arose the need to return to Badaun over and over the next 4 or 5 years, and to talk to people and to find out, how did this happen? Two children go to a field at night, and then they're found the next morning hanging in a tree in a very close-knit village. In a village where they were born, in the village where they know everyone. Everyone is an uncle or an aunt. The clan itself is more than 60 or 70 people. How could it happen? And who were they? And does nobody know anything? And that's why I decided to eventually abandon the idea of writing this big book about sexual violence, and to write the story of two girls and their family and their friends and their teachers and the people that they loved and the people who loved them. And ultimately, I think this story tells you, I hope, everything you need to know about why we don't have resolution and why we are stuck in this cycle of violence. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like you said, that, this was a village where everybody knew everybody, where everybody was like a family. I think family forms the crux of your book. It's
Yeah.
more about family. And there's a very important point that you have raised in the book. When these two girls disappear, the concern at large was not about what would happen to these girls, but more about what would happen to families' honor in light of their disappearance. Where do you think this quest for honor in our society stop, according to you?
So I think that Padma and Lali, the children, were very much loved. They had a wonderful network of friends, of teachers, of uncles, of aunts. They had lots of cousins. They lived in a very close-knit joint family. These were children who were very beloved to their community, and I don't think there is any disputing that. But I also think that, village life is just it's just very, very different. And survival is not really about personal survival as much as it is surviving and living alongside and fitting in with the rest of the community. The village does everything together. And therefore, your successes are never just your successes, they're the successes of your village. Your failures are never just your failures, they are the failure of an entire village. And that is huge burden for people to have to carry, because it means that the clothes that they wear, the food that they eat, the people they talk to, who they marry, we always think that these are, in some parts of the world, these are decisions that the individual takes. In some other parts of the world, they are decisions that your family may take for you. But in some villages in India, it is so much more intense than that. You have to really take into consideration everybody else, your village. Your village cannot see you doing or saying the wrong thing. And that burden means that people have to constantly check themselves, they have to constantly police themselves, and they have to constantly police each other. And so a matter that is intensely personal, intensely is devastating, the death of your child, never is not just the death of your child. It is also viewed through the prism of what that death means to your village. And I think because of the circumstances in which the death took place, which I won't go into details, so as not to give your viewers any spoilers, but because of the very particular circumstances of the death, the family immediately felt this enormous burden to act in a certain way. And as we find out in the book, their actions were detrimental to their cause. And I don't blame them. And I feel that we make it very hard in India for people to have individual agency. And this is what we see in the book. And women carry the burden 100%. But it would be wrong to say that men are not burdened by these things either.
Absolutely, I agree on with you on that. Uh, Apart from social, the constraints that village life has for women, do you think that poverty also leaves women vulnerable to crimes related to honor or violence? Where does economy factor in, according to you here?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. I think that, if you look at this particular village of Katra, for example, the women that I interviewed, the older women are not educated. Padma and Lali's mothers and their aunts, for example, cannot read and write. And they are relatively young. They're all in their 30s and their 40s. Padma's mother, for example, is in her late 30s. Her mother's in her early 40s. And these women understand that not having an education is it just constricts your life in so many ways. And they worked so hard to ensure that their daughters are educated. But all of that has happened to a point because there are no schools, there are no high schools anywhere close to the village. And even if there were high schools, there are no sources of employment that can help the women get a living wage. So ultimately, even education is seen as a way to prepare a woman for marriage rather than as a way to make a woman independent. So she continues to be dependent. She is better off than her mother and her grandmother, but she's not in a position to support herself. And she's not in a position to have agency. So I think that, if there were schools, high schools close by, if there was jobs that the young women could have, um, I think it would make a difference. But I also don't think that it's any one thing, because on the one hand, we have seen that women who have agency and express their power come under particular scrutiny and often suffer more than those who do not have power, do not have agency. So we cannot simply say that having more schools and providing women with jobs is the answer to the solution. It's not, but it is one very important aspect.
I think that's a very important point that you have raised, that it doesn't mean that women in cities or women in privileged sections of society are safe from crimes related to sex or honor. Uh, we have observed that in India in past few months, since last year as well, there's this increased policing of love, and everyone wants to have a say in who women love, who women marry. Keeping in mind all the conversation that's been happening around this love jihad thing, and censoring interfaith marriages, do you think anything at all has changed in India since the Badaun incident happened?
Um, I mean, I find it hard to say. On the one hand, there's always the temptation to say nothing has changed, nothing ever changes. But on the other hand, that's not true. I think that we have progressed so much and continue to progress in terms of um, in terms of carrying other people along with us. At the same time, we in India have to be constantly vigilant, because not everybody agrees that an equal society or a just society or a society where underrepresented groups, marginalized groups are part of the mainstream is beneficial. There is always going to be an attempt to keep people down, to keep people back. And we are certainly seeing that right now. In fact, the atmosphere, unfortunately, seems particularly violent, particularly virulent. And it's very, very concerning. And I think that we must continue to do what many of us have always done, which is to participate rather than saying, I can't take this anymore. There is no good news, and I'm not going to read the papers, and I'm going to pretend nothing is happening. I think that is possibly the worst response. I think we need to continue to participate, keep our eyes and ears open, contribute to conversations, and to call these acts of violence and abuse out as they keep happening. Because really, it seems bizarre that it needs to be said that who we love is nobody's business but ours. But apparently it must be said.
Right. Uh, this was also, this case is from back in 2014, when social media was relatively a new phenomena in India. Do you think somehow social media has in fact acted as an enabler in stricter policing of women? Because now even online, there's no space for them offline or online where they can live their lives on their terms. Has
Yeah.
it become an escape or a mode for policing, according to you?
I'm sorry, has it become?
Has it acted as has it provided a much needed escape for women from their everyday realities, or is it just that it is just another way to police women now?
I think that in families where there is a tendency to restrict women's rights, to tell women how to behave, how to think, how to act, how to feel, who to love, then the introduction of social media is simply one more thing to police. But in families where people are understanding that women need to be allowed to live, to be free, then social media is as much of a source of enjoyment and freedom, and communication as it is for anyone else. So I think it's very hard in some places in India for women to be individuals, to be themselves. I think because we just have a tendency of not letting women be, of constantly having our gaze on them. And that is really where we need to start, where we need to start changing how we act.
That's true. So Deepshika Chakravarti wants to know, how can we inculcate the idea that individual autonomy is important even at a family level?
Hmm. I think this is such a hard question. Um, I just feel like unless you recognize that women are individuals, they are not an attachment. They are not, they do not speak for your family. They do not speak for your community. They are not responsible for your reputation. They are simply who they are, and they should simply be allowed to be. I don't know how we can go further than that. It simply starts, I think, at a very young age of um, of just letting little girls be, and letting them be in the same way that we let little boys be, and we often tell ourselves that the reason we can't give our girls freedom is because the world is a terrible place. And certainly everything in the news confirms this belief, and we feel that a lot of our behavior, um, we can argue, stems from a good place, stems from a need to protect, to care for. But I think we need to understand that by doing that, we're doing an incredible amount of damage to girls and women. I mean, damage that becomes insurmountable even in adulthood, because women are infantilized for so long, and they're just simply not allowed to be independent. So I think we really have to start changing how we think, and that may start that education, that self-education. Is something we need to take responsibility for. It's not something the government can do. It's not something you can expect a school to do for you. You have to read, you have to watch, you have to listen, and you have to simply decide that you're going to allow your child, your wife, your best friend, the women in your family, community, each other to be free.
Yeah. Uh, as you said, this is wrong for our girls, but let's talk about our boys as well, Sonia. In The Good Girls, you have also captured what a conservative way of life does to men in our country. We see these men who work hard. We see these men as sole breadwinners for their family, who are constantly tensed about how they were going to make money. They're traveling for miles to to earn their bread and butter. And they're also, despite having access to mobile phones and internet, they cannot break free from the traps of an orthodox mindset. They find it, they cannot express their love for their loved ones, for their daughters, for their wives. So don't you think it's important for us to also talk how patriarchy and this policing also is detrimental to men in our country?
Yeah, that is such an important observation, and it's such a fantastic question. Um, in the book is about, as you know, it's about Padma and Lali, the two children, and all the people around them. They had this cousin Nazru who was being extremely strange about them. They had fathers and uncles and mothers and sisters and cousins, all of, and they were in this like they're almost museum pieces to be gazed at and to be assessed constantly. But the same people who were gazing and assessing and judging them were, as you very rightly point out, being gazed and being judged by everyone around them. So it's really, it's just so, it's like a chokehold living in and this is a small village, right? But I'm not convinced that this is how it simply is in villages. I think that we do have this sort of behavior in many other parts of the country, and it affects everybody. Everybody is victim. Everybody is a police officer. Everybody is judging everyone else. Everyone is simultaneously sucking the joy out of other people's lives while themselves being forced to live joyless lives. And I think it has such a detrimental effect on the quality of our lives, on our mental health. The fact that in this village, for example, the girls could graze their goats to get away from their family and just to have a chat and just to have a bit of a gossip. They could graze their goats, they could go and sit under the trees in the orchard. But what could the boys do? I mean, the boys couldn't do all that much. The boys had phones and no one to call. The boys may have access to a cycle, but there's nowhere to go. Where are you going to go? Who are you going to meet? You don't have money anywhere. And everybody is watching you, to the extent that I was able to find out later on what the dietary restrictions of some of the main characters in the book were. Because people are so closely policed, they can tell you ki thali mein kya tha, and that is, it's something that I think because it's just so much a part of our lives, culturally and socially, we don't recognize it anymore. But this is not how you live. And the idea that we have that, the most important thing is work, and it is your work and honor. I don't see that having taken us very much forward. I think it has been so, I think it's created a community, a society that is very lopsided, and that doesn't have any respect for individual liberty, and doesn't ultimately contribute to harmony, because it is Orwellian in the way we are constantly looking at each other. So yes, absolutely. The book is about girls, but the book is also about boys and men and the things that we do to each other, on the excuse that we are, trying to be good citizens.
As an author, as a woman author, what was the most challenging part about writing this book? You told me that it took you 6 long years to finish it. And what was the hardest part of it?
So one of the things that happens when you repeatedly visit people is the belief that they develop that you are there to tell their story, and that you will essentially transcribe anything that they tell you, and what they tell you is going to be accepted as truth. So one of the things that I had to repeatedly do was to inform all the many people I spoke to, the members of Padma's family, the members of Lalli's family, the members of Pappu Yadav's family, who were accused of killing the girls, the police officers who dealt with them on the night they disappeared, the officers who came in the next day, the politicians, the CBI officers. This is not your story. This is the story of what happened. And everything you say to me will be verified. And this is about telling the truth of what happened. And this is and I think that was it, that just making sure that people understood that I wasn't there to be anyone's mouthpiece. I was there to understand why two children in 2014, two children are found hanging in a tree. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. This cannot be allowed to happen for whatever reasons the children died. The death of a child is it is a shocking tragedy. You cannot forget it and you cannot normalize it. And we need to understand how this happened. And in order to do that, I kept going back to Badaun and I spoke to, I think, more than 200 people. I gained access to the CBI investigation files. They are about 3,000 pages, and eventually put together not one side, not the other side, but everything. I mean, what you get in The Good Girls, from the story of how the postmortem was conducted to how everybody tried to hide their own tracks. That is the story of The Good Girls. It is about the children ultimately, and I had to make sure that people understood that.
Absolutely. So, Sonia, we still live in a world where love, sex, attraction remain a taboo, unfortunately. How do we get across the point that it is normal to love, that anybody's sexuality or anybody's love life is nobody else's business? How can we do that in a society like ours?
Yamini, you're asking all the tough questions. I I wish I had an answer for you. I wish I knew how to get people to stop policing one another. I I do think that, it does a lot of times come down to the strength of our laws. It comes down to the efficacy of policing. It comes down to the prompt response of our criminal justice system, because we do understand that, if we are allowed to get away with things, the natural human instinct is to repeat that behavior. But if you do it once and you are punished for it, whatever that behavior may be, if you are following a woman, if you are stalking a couple, if you are harassing two young lovers for holding hands, if you find out that there are consequences for that behavior, then you are simply less likely to repeat that. Whereas one of the things that we know, and one of the things that we find out in The Good Girls, is that many of the people who, when something terrible happens, we inevitably find out, as we do here, that it was not the first time. That people are repeat offenders in whatever they do, small or big. And, yes, we need everybody to pull together and we need all the pieces to fall into place. But one of the things that we know we can actually do is to have good, strong laws in place and people who are willing to implement those laws, and use laws the way they are meant to be used for the security of society as a whole and for the protection of vulnerable communities, not to harass people who are vulnerable, and use that technique over and over, as we are seeing in India now, to take away attention from the actual problems. So I would say we need laws to work, the police to be equipped, and for politicians to understand that they are responsible for the well-being of our community, not for causing disharmony and strife and encouraging violence.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Sonia, but I have another question on those lines, that is fear of consequences the right way to move forward? I mean, does it not take away the responsibility of individuals as parents or as relatives to innately, raise good people?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you think about
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't think we can, just wash our hands and say, well, if my kid grows up to be XYZ, well, the police will handle it. I'm not suggesting that that's the way. I do think that everybody, we simply just need to recognize that this, how we treat women, and also our attitude towards men, needs rectifying. And I do think that everybody needs to contribute, that there is no single solution. I just do think a lot of times that because we know when, because we know that, repeat offenders are such a problem, and often when at the end of the worst cases, when the worst cases are investigated, we always find out 99 out of 100 times that so-and-so person has been doing this for years. They have done it several times before, and they were encouraged to repeat it because they were not caught, and so I do think there is a failing of police, of criminal justice. And I also understand that, having worked in Uttar Pradesh for years, having met the 5 police officers who were at the Chowki in Katra when the children went missing, that they really are not equipped. I mean, Yamini, the police officers at the Chowki, they didn't have a phone. They don't have computers. They don't have a car. They don't have running water in their Chowki. They don't have a toilet. They don't even have a place to sleep. And they are supposed to live in the Chowki, you know? So, every system, every part of our system is currently failing, or is not working as it should. So even as I say the police must take responsibility, I'm very much aware of the fact that the Chowki policeman had no resources, and that sense of feeling that, what, nobody cares, nobody's giving me any support, so why should I care? A sense of lethargy infuses the whole system. And that's visible at every level, the police, the courts, the doctors, the hospitals, the mortuary. You've read about how the children were examined. You've read about, at every step of the way, success is the one thing, success in solving the case is the one thing that is almost impossible,
True. I think this is a very insightful conversation, but we are running out of time. So, my last question to you would be, I think writing a book is a two-way process. Every book takes a part of you with it, but it also gives you lessons. So, as an author, as a person, Sonia, what has The Good Girls given to you?
I guess a sense of gratitude, with with the opportunities that I had, when I've spent now so many years in Katra, so many years going in and out of Uttar Pradesh, and one of the things that you recognize immediately, and I'm sure you and your viewers would know this, is that the young people in India have so much potential. They are so bright, and they could do anything if they are just given the support. If we just encourage them, give them education and skills, and just tell them what we tell ourselves or what we tell our own kids, which is that you can be anything, And when I going there and realizing that this immense potential, seriously, the most valuable thing a country can have is young people. And seeing that these young people in Katra and beyond, they don't have any hope. Their whole youth is spent in dreams that they know they will never be allowed to fulfill, either because they are girls, or because they're poor, or because their families stand in their way. And I think that it's something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about, and feeling gratitude for the fact that I've had opportunities, thinking about how I can give back, but also thinking about how we need to move forward as a society, because I think right now we are keeping the majority of our population back. And that's just not tenable for a country, like for any country, especially not a country like ours where the majority are young and so full of promise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonia. It was a very insightful conversation. I hope that readers do read The Good Girls, and I hope that their sleep is taken away. I hope they're not able to sleep as I haven't been. I have been thinking about the book. Thank you for taking out time today to join us for Women's Writers Fest, and thank you, our viewers today, for giving your valuable time to us. We hope to bring you more such insightful conversations and more dynamic authors like Sonia in our future editions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yamini.